It's time once again for Dialogue Conspiracy with Mae Brussel. For the past 14 years, Mae has been researching and uncovering facts and evidence from between the lines of the news and placing them in a more thorough perspective of how conspiracy, political assassination, and power affect us all. Dialogue Conspiracy originates with KLRB-FM in Carmel, California. And now, Mae Brussel.
Good evening. This is Mae Brussel. Call if we're not on the air. There's a story that's not going over the air, but we'll see what's happening here on the board. Is it on the air now? Yeah. Okay. Good evening. It's Mae Brussel in Carmel, California. This is Dialogue Conspiracy number 296, and it's November the 20th, 1977. This is the 14th anniversary this week of the assassination of John Kennedy. That's when I started my work, November 24th, 1963, the day that Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald, who was handcuffed inside the Dallas jail, and it was viewed on national TV. I'm not going into the Kennedy assassination today. I do talk about it on and off on Dialogue Conspiracy, and I have no confidence in the committee in Washington. I'll be talking about that more in the next few weeks. I do jump back and forth in this research. The investigation of the assassination of John Kennedy led me down a lot of paths. I got into various aspects of government control after this event and other assassinations, and literally hundreds of murders that go into the thousands now. And it also led me to stories of mind control and the government connivance and burglary, wiretapping, and various crimes, too numerous to list in a half-hour show. And in the course of my research on the Kennedy assassination, I met researchers from all over the United States and many from other countries. And someday I'll do a book about the experience just of the researchers, and some of them are fantastic people. I call them the soldiers of America. I refer to them as real soldiers. And some of them have infiltrated the research group and worked for the government in counterintelligence or are counterproductive and divisive and do the research no good at all. We won't go into those tonight, but I did meet a woman in Salinas who's a fantastic person, Lydia Blades, and she's with me tonight, and she's going to be my guest. For those of you that remember Lydia, I got such a good response. It was November the 1st, 1976. Remember? Just a year ago. Lydia was on the show, and we talked about a book that came out called File on the Czar by Anthony Summers and Tom Mangold. And Lydia and I were talking about problems in the Middle East. She probably is an expert on history, the one historian that I have full confidence in that can relate the research I do, the political assassinations, to the moving of governments. And Lydia has studied history, the important history that affects today. How far back would you say your work goes now? To 1905, is that the main date?
Well, I concentrate on 1905 forward. I don't know any historian in the public view who thinks that 1905 is an important date, but I think it's the opening gun
of World War I and World War II.
That's right.
But what we want to talk about tonight, we won't cover that whole breadth of history. We were talking about the arrival of Anwar Sadat in Israel, and I watched that yesterday. I was literally moved to tears. I think it was one of the most dramatic scenes that I've seen. On the surface, didn't you think it was very dramatic?
On the surface, yes.
Riding in on the red carpet and the Israeli national anthem and the
very moving
flags from Egypt. And it was as moving to me as the Kennedy assassination on television, the whole story, the killing of Kennedy, and then the killing of Lee Harvey Oswald and the funeral. That provided so far 14 years of research and literally about 175, 180 books now on that murder. And I had the feeling that something was happening here with John Chancellor and Walter Cronkite, and you wanted to believe there was peace. And Lydia and I talked about it. Lydia has studied these countries in the Middle East so much that we're going to go into that a little bit, and I want to share her feelings about what she thinks happens. Many times on KLRB, I have speculated the minute Son of Sam surfaced or the Chowchilla kidnapping. I've express my views based upon the way the CIA handled the Manson family or the Patty Hearst kidnapping. And the way I see similarities of individuals affecting our social force by the intelligence community, Lydia sees the moving of nations in the same way and is able to put these pieces together and, on the basis of past history, speculate on the future and offer her opinion. So this is what I wanted to share tonight, and I wanted to talk about Prime Minister Begin. First of all, there isn't much known about him except that he led the air gun. Is there much about him in these recent years before he took over as Prime Minister?
No, I don't know too much about him as a person from the time he was in the air gun.
That's right. There's a big missing gap there.
There's a missing link.
There's the
yes.
Moshe Dayan and Goldie Meir, but he's a missing link. When he was leading the air gun, I was in Palestine at the time in 1936 when his group was bombing the King David Hotel. And I thought it was interesting to hear that Anwar Sadat was going to be staying there at that hotel, and that the man who was in charge of that violence at the time was a prime minister. But there's a lot of missing years, aren't there, in the background?
Well, there's a saying that I like. Old terrorists never die. They just turn into prime ministers.
Is that your own?
Well, no, I think I've heard that somewhere else. But it's remarkably true.
That he's quiet.
Yes. It's not only of Begin,
but others.
But many others were terrorists in their time.
Well, and Anwar Sadat has been named in books as being a member of the Borman Brotherhood.
Yeah.
It took a 1,000-year oath to maintain the promises of Adolf Hitler, that he worked with Hitler.
The 1,000-year Reich.
And as a matter of fact, when they decided that they wouldn't meet on Monday in the Israeli councils as speaking either Hebrew or Egyptian, they both said they could speak Polish. They're both trained in Polish, which I thought was interesting because I'm not familiar where Anwar Sadat learned his Polish.
No, the same thing is true with him. There's a gap in my knowledge of him.
So we have these two mysterious people that I did see on 60 Minutes talking and looking tongue-in-cheek, knowing the mystery of these two men. There's a tongue-in-cheek about them. So I wanted you to share your information about these countries specifically. For example, what do you think is the purpose of Anwar Sadat meeting Prime Minister Begin in Israel at this time?
Well, May, this is a situation in which I would rather be wrong than president. I hope I'm wrong.
Let me interrupt by saying she has a good batting average. Just say what you think they're doing.
Well, I hope that this is not going to happen, but it does strike me that the stage is set for a triple play in the Middle East. And if you have an atlas handy, you might look at a map. If you don't have an atlas handy, write it down and look at the atlas afterward. If these three things happen simultaneously, then there could be a disaster in store. If the Shah of Iran moves into Iraq and takes Iraq, while at the same time Sadat moves into Libya and takes Libya, and simultaneously Begin moves into Syria and thereby acquires both Syria and Lebanon. That would be a disaster, I think, for this reason. The three socialist countries in the Middle East are Libya, Syria, and Iraq. So that if this occurred, Russia would be almost forced to intervene.
And go to war. You think
Yes.
we're like a missile crisis, that we are at a point where the CIA, arranging this through Walter Cronkite and so forth, moving these people together, are moving to get rid of the socialist countries in the Middle East totally, where Russia has any influence at all?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Now that's one possible result.
Uh-huh.
But it would Russia would be in the position of standing by, a woman standing by watching her daughter get raped. She'd have to move.
You think that Russia wouldn't allow it?
I don't think she could.
Would Israel make a deal with Sadat that Egypt could take over Libya
Yes.
And Israel wouldn't respond.
This is what makes me so suspicious, because you do have to admit that the last two people in the world to have dinner together tonight would be Sadat and Begin. Unless it was to their mutual benefit. Now, the one thing that Egypt, for instance, would have to do before she could move on Libya would be secure her border with Israel.
You say her rear end. Each one of these countries has a rear end.
That's right. And the one thing that Begin would have to do before he moved into Syria would be secure his border with Egypt. And that is what they are doing tonight.
And how do you feel, what would Begin have to gain by meeting with Anwar Sadat?
Securing their border.
To secure the border. And Egypt would be securing their border.
That's correct.
And they would agree that if they both became the attackers, one against Lebanon, one against Libya, they would remain silent. They wouldn't interrupt each other.
That's what I think is very possibly being arranged.
And you think the major goal is to take over the socialist countries in the Middle East for the CIA?
That's just one advantage. Another advantage would be, if you're the Shah of Iran and you run a tight ship and then some, you can't stand to have a socialist country next door broadcasting all the virtues of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what you want.
Is that why the Shah is getting so many arms now?
Well, he's been buying arms as if money were no object,
Well, it isn't.
And I followed, to some extent, what kind of arms he's buying. He's buying aggressive arms. He's not he's not erecting any Maginot Lines.
I always felt that we were arming the Shah of Iran to take over Saudi Arabia if we needed their oil. You don't think that's a possibility?
I don't think that Saudi Arabia is going to bother the Shah much, because it isn't broadcasting any propaganda about how good socialism is.
Uh-huh. You think that they can deal with the monarchy there?
I think they do desperately want to get rid of Iraq.
Uh-huh. And the trouble sores are Iraq. Well, Lebanon isn't a trouble sore. Why would they let Israel attack Lebanon?
Well, I don't think Israel would attack Lebanon. I think Israel would attack Syria. Syria's army is right now occupying Lebanon, so that if Israel took Syria, they would get Lebanon. But there is one pearl in Lebanon, and that is Beirut. I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you fly, say, from London to Delhi, to India,
it's the
your
route.
stopover is Beirut.
And that is the Wall Street of the Middle East.
Yes.
Yeah, you referred to that as the Paris or the Switzerland.
Yes.
The banking center of the Middle East.
The trading center, all sorts of financial business and clout.
Do you think the CIA would let Israel take Beirut?
Yes, I think they would.
You would?
Yes. I don't think Lebanon is very dear to the CIA's heart.
So that you feel that the move that they're making now is for aggression in the Middle East?
Yes, a blitzkrieg.
A blitzkrieg.
In other words, I think this may take place so quickly that by the time the world rubs its sleepy eyes and says, "Oh, what was that?"
Yeah. Well, I think we're doing this. We're getting ready to take Uganda. I think that there's a newspaper I take that doesn't have an article about Idi Amin and cruelty and things. Nothing any different than what's happening in our prisons or the people being killed in this country. These witnesses, just the congressional hearings, being slain, blown up, car accidents, cancers, mysterious diseases and so forth. We have these killings going on here. Idi Amin can't be any different than what we're doing here, but they're hell-bent on taking Central Africa, and that'll be a blitzkrieg of a kind. He'll be dead one day, and then the coffee and the minerals and resources, they'll have a central place, a spoke of the wheel to take over all of Africa from.
Well, I'm always entertained by the sermons on human rights, because you can't even mention human rights in the same sentence with South Africa. Or Iran.
And yet our investments are over there. It's impossible to pull out. They have so many investments over there. What are the precedents of history where two swindlers had a grin such as
Or
was
three.
on three of them sitting on national television. Walter Cronkite, who has always been affiliated, particularly with these new exposés, but always on the side of the CIA, sitting with Anwar Sadat and Prime Minister Begin. What precedents in history were there when these ruffians sat together and grinned and put something over on us?
Well, there were some very entertaining precedents.
Serious, not entertaining.
All of which are worth.
I think of the Berlin Pact, of Stalin and Hitler.
World War II.
Prior to World War II, where everyone thought there'd be peace.
Oh yes, the Berlin-Moscow Pact was a case of two connivers.
Yes, and everyone thought that the purpose of Adolf Hitler with Joseph Stalin was peace, and yet shortly afterwards the war broke out, the invasion of Poland.
Well, he was securing his rear. Exactly the way I think that
You mean
Sadat,
before attacking Poland, he
wanted to know that one border was going to be quiet.
Yeah. Well, did Stalin agree to be quiet then when Poland was
Certainly
taken?
did. He didn't have too many alternatives.
He just didn't do anything.
No. I have, as a matter of fact, I have the secret protocol on that particular
Meaning
treaty, and it's lovely to read. Sometime I must give you that, May, and let you read it. We won't go into it now, but very interesting. These secret deals are unbelievably crude.
Yeah.
There's one where three swindlers sat down and partitioned the whole country of Poland.
Well, didn't Japan sit with Germany and partition all of Russia in 1905? We once talked about that. They partitioned who would get the Baltic and the Ukraine and the oils and the minerals. And actually, prior to World War I, they had divided Russia up, didn't they?
Yes, in their minds, they had it all agreed. All agreed. Japan was to take part of Siberia, and England was to go in and have the Baku oil fields, and Turkey was to take some, and Germany was to have some.
What was the reason? That the Tsar was corrupt? That they were going to divide it up?
No. The reason was that the Tsar had, well, of course the Tsar was corrupt, yes. But the Tsar had had a war with Japan, and Japan being a feudal country almost at that time, and Russia being the greatest power on earth, Japan won and sank almost all of Russia's navy while she was at it. And this was incredible.
So they thought they could go back and take all of Russia?
Well, the message that was sent out to the world was, Russia is weak.
Yeah.
All right. Not only that, but her strategists are age 7.
Is this similar to the Middle East, where they're figuring these countries are weak, that they can come in now and maybe take them while they're down?
Well, they're not nearly so strong, you see, as they were when Nasser was alive, and he kept up a strong union between, say, Syria and Egypt, and they were agreed to go to one another's aid. But in this situation, none of them can help the other because they're being attacked at the same time.
In other words, if Syria's being attacked, Iraq can't go to their aid because they'd be attacked at the same time.
That's correct. And Egypt can't go to Syria's aid because she's busy attacking Libya.
Well, why would Egypt go to Syria if they're socialists, or why would the Iranians help the Iraq? If they're socialists, they would want to undermine them and take them.
Well, Arabs to help Arabs. You see, Nasser emphasized the Arab aspect.
So that he would have helped Syria.
Yes.
But no longer. I mean, that's...
Sadat hasn't got any...
How much does Sadat owe the Soviet Union in money?
Well, Sadat is a man between a rock and a hard place. He borrowed money from Russia as if it were going out of style.
How much does he owe them?
Well, the exact amount I don't know, but he did announce that he was only going to pay, I think, part of the interest, none of the principal. He
millions?
Cannot.
20, 30,
yes.
40 million?
Oh, hundreds of millions. And they loaned it to him at very low interest.
Yeah.
But he can't pay it back. And he also has borrowed from the United States. And there is no way for him to get any more big loans unless he produces something of benefit to his lenders.
Do you think that
such as Libya?
Do you think the CIA could set up these countries, just like they did in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, South Vietnam. They set up a system where the lower economic class in America and the students and the poor were sent to fight. And the people that sent the guns, the airplanes, the helicopters, that made the war, made tremendous profits. So it didn't matter who was fighting over there. The profits at home created a millionaire class in this country. And then the CIA got into the narcotics traffic, and of course that's just going full blown. Do you think that the CIA could set up these countries, because we know the CIA is behind this meeting of Anwar Sadat and Begin. Do you think they could set this up to divide and conquer these countries against each other as an excuse to send Americans to the Middle East, in quotes, to cause peace again? In other words, ship people over. We have these men going over now that are paid mercenaries. But we want to maintain a total control of all oil in the Middle East and the Mediterranean Sea. Do you think we could create these people against each other as an excuse to send Americans over there?
Well, I think that the word is oil.
Yeah.
Number one.
But in addition to oil, there's this whole armament industry. Warfare is such good business.
Let me go back to one thing you mentioned about narcotics. There's oil, there's money, there's power. But let me go back to narcotics. There's so many things. Narcotics has, from time immemorial, been used to raise money for espionage. Wherever you have an empire, which require, especially a far-flung empire, you have narcotics. And the moment you begin to run across large-scale narcotics, then you only have to look for espionage, and it's right around the corner.
Well, this is what I was wondering, the home of the narcotics around here in Turkey and the whole scene over there, opium and where it's grown, and Syria. Is this setting up, for example, say, the way the Black Panthers were set up, Huey Newton against Eldridge Cleaver, and the divide and conquer principle? It's done in the women's group, but Betty Friedan against Gloria Steinem. Recently, she came out last week, and a listener sent me an article, Betty Friedan saying, the CIA isn't taking over the women's movement. They were divide and conquer. Everything that is going is, okay, could they encourage these countries to invade and make war against each other as an excuse to drop American troops like we did in Southeast Asia? Turn them against each other and come in the protectors again. The reason I ask that is that when you get Cyrus Vance in the same team, Mr. Schlesinger was Secretary of Defense. He's now in on the energy, the oil deals, and natural gas, and so forth. When you get the same team that gave you Vietnam, appointed by Jimmy Carter, they're going to give you the Middle East. So then the question is, you sit back and look at these people. Do they write the script? We know they're promoting a lot of this. Do you think they're affecting these changes? In other words, encouraging the Shah that, hey, you can go on down and take care of Iraq, that kind of thing. Do you think they're doing it?
Well, you see, there has to be the first thing that clues you in, I think, is that there has to be something deadly wrong when people who have had anything to do with Vietnam and Cambodia, people who have had anything to do with Watergate, are resurrected as honest citizens and force-fed down our throats again, you see.
Well, Clark Clifford came out as attorney for Burt Lance, and he was the original attorney for the Howard Hughes, Richard Nixon loans. I mean, through all of history, the war, Lyndon Johnson's attorney, the same people repeating the same script. Aren't they going to get us into the same wars? Can you sit and watch Anwar Sadat arrive and feel that there's going to be peace in the Middle East?
No.
Not with these people?
No. I think the only reason why Begin and Sadat are going to cooperate is because they both have something great to gain.
And Israel will gain the security of its northern fields.
Yes.
They'll
northern
let them.
Borders.
They've just a week before Sadat came to Israel, the Israelis were attacking Lebanon.
Right.
Shelling Lebanon for no reason at all. If you're going to sit down and talk with an Arab leader, you're certainly not going to be bombing an Arab country unless you have an agreement that that's kosher with him.
That's right. Well, for instance, Begin told Lebanon and Syria. Look, you can't have any soldiers within 5 miles of the Israeli border. Now, what do you think the United States would say if Canada said to the United States, look, you can't have any soldiers within 5 miles of our border? That's not something that you say if you're looking for peace.
Yeah. So you think the Shah of Iran is gaining arms to get into Iraq?
I would be
to make an aggressive.
I certainly don't think that he's doing it to come to a Tea Party.
What does Iraq have in terms of oil and strategy?
Iraq doesn't have as much as Iran,
uh-huh.
but she does have. You see, if you look at the map here, May, what you see is a passageway of friendly countries for Russia down into the Middle East. Once Iraq and Syria are gone, are turned into parts of Iran or parts of Israel, Russia has just backed up.
Right into their own boundary.
That's right.
Yeah. Do they need these paths anymore with the kind of planes and transportation that we have? Do they need to get through?
Do you mean for survival? No.
Yes.
No, not for survival. But on the other hand, it's something that Russia cannot overlook.
All these socialist countries.
And I imagine that should Russia intervene, the first country that would catch it would be Iran.
Yeah, that
they have a common border, and I'm sure that their path would be down through Iran. So I can see that the Shah is treading very dangerous ground indeed, particularly the Shah.
Okay, one last question, or we have time for 2 more questions. Do you think that this is as treacherous as the missile crisis that we're playing on the brink of World War III?
Yes.
I got some information about the possibility I did on KLRB, I think it was this last August, that we were about to go to war over an incident in Albania. And Mr. N.K. Fields had given me that from up in Sacramento, and I began to read the history books and go over them. I think I went over them with you. We were indeed almost at the brink of World War III when John Kennedy was president. They drove him to almost the brink, and here's this team taking Jimmy Carter right to the edge of the water now, and he's so ineffectual and dependent upon these advisors that he'll do anything that they want. He's not a historian in that sense.
No, I don't think he's a student of history. But then when you consider in 1960 that we almost went to war over Quemoy and Matsu, and the very man who was willing to make war over Quemoy and Matsu was the man who went to Peking and Moscow, then one never knows.
You never know. So you think that Russia would step in, and do you think that Sadat is making a deal now that if he moves west into Libya, Israel will just let them take it?
That's right.
They're all going to secure their borders.
I feel sorry for Sadat. I don't think there's a way in the world that he can win. I especially feel sorry for Sadat, because supposing this is effective and he does go in and take Libya, just because he went to Jerusalem, I think he will be assassinated.
Yes, that once even if he's made a secret deal, they can always assassinate him because he's made enough natural enemies now that the secrecy of the deal, he can't come back later and say, hey, you told me this, because he's created natural enemies.
He can't announce the deal.
That's right.
If it's what I think it is.
That's the way these people that work for the CIA, these hundreds that were killed, witnesses these assassinations, they never can live to say, hey, I was double-crossed after I did the deal, because they're murdered and history erases. Well, neither of us are very optimistic about the Middle East, but Lydia knows more than I do on that subject. That's why I wanted her to share her information on those countries, because while I was moved, as I said, watching TV, I also had a feeling that something bigger was happening and that we'll sit back and watch. And thanks a lot for coming. Lydia will come back again soon because she's got a lot to share with you, and thanks a lot.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me, May.
Okay, this is May Brussel and Carmel. We'll see you next week on Dialogue Conspiracy.
You've been listening to Dialogue Conspiracy with May Brussel.